On today's Throwback, we're having a look at the Mezco Halloween 2 Michael Myers. With it being Halloween, Spot thought it would be a perfect opportunity to go back and have a look at some of his classic figures in his collection, and more importantly, we're going to have a look at the Michael Myers figures. This one's a little bit different in the fact that this was Mezco's take on the Halloween Michael Myers. It was one of their only few attempts at making a Michael Myers, and funny enough, as we had already looked at on this channel, there it is right there, there was the NECA version of Michael Myers from the original remake. That's almost even funny saying, the original remake. But the original remake Rob Zombie Halloween. While this one brings a lot to the table, ultimately I kind of feel like Mezco's was just a little bit stronger, though don't kid yourself, there are weaknesses in this figure. More importantly, I guess the main one is he's in this weird crouching kind of squatting position. Whereas Michael, the original Michael, was very tall. Granted, he had the bent leg, which can be, again, problematic getting him to properly stand. But at least it stood tall. Then Mezco, for some reason, decided to make not only one leg bent, but both legs bent. It kind of makes him a little off proportions. It just makes him look shorter than really what the figure should have been. That I wish that this figure could have just been standing straight up. The one accessory that he comes with, let's take it out of his hand, is his knife. And it is somewhat of a problem to get in and out of his hand because the fit on the one hand, and only fits really this one hand, it's the handle. Look at the handle, how thick that knife handle is. It can be a bit of a hassle to try to get this knife handle into said closed or partially closed hand. The blood's pretty good, but nothing against Mezco. At least some of the earlier Mezco stuff, like their old Cinema Fear lines, the blood sometimes didn't look the most realistic. This blood actually, by that comparison, is pretty good. It's a little bit darker where it's congealed and it's kind of dried up. So I'll give it that. It's not terribly bad. But it does have one thick handle to it. Just put that to the side. There's like something different about the quality of plastic versus NECA. And it's hard to describe it. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not implying that the plastic feels cheap on this Myers versus this one, but the plastic, like the feel of plastic feels different. Like you can when you get a Mezco figure, whether it be like the original Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger's, this Michael Myers, for example, you can kind of pick it up and you know right away it's a Mezco figure. I don't know how to describe that. But it feels like limb-wise, his arms just kind of feel a little more chunky, if that makes any sense. Like the hands feel just a little bit more chunky than that of the NECA, the NECA releases. He's still got the worker's outfit, but again, like the outfit that he gets from the truck driver, it's a little bit lighter in color. It's not as detailed, I would say, to the NECA one. So I think props can be given to the NECA for being a little bit better look, a little higher quality of paint to their Una. Again, I don't know the actual name, the mechanics kind of outfit. Mezco seems just a little more washed out, but they put a lot of blood on it. There's a lot of blood both on the front, the back, and all over his arms. Let's have a look at his face. This is where I'm going to give points to Mezco. I think they did a better look for the mask, if you ask me. Now, one thing I wasn't crazy about in the... Well, let me rephrase that. The remakes, I wasn't crazy about to start off with, but I had less of a problem, I think, as I mentioned before, with the sequel, just because by that point, I feel like I was almost more desensitized by what to expect from a Rob Zombie Halloween imagining Whereas the first one, I think I was kind of going in thinking, okay, it's going to be a lot like John Carpenter's, and maybe that was my mistake. Because while it did have a lot of carryovers from the originals, Rob Zombie definitely incorporated his own thing to it as well. But if you remember the sequel to the remake, Myers goes through some transitioning, especially with his mask. In fact, the majority of the movie, he's not even wearing this mask. He only puts it on when it seems like he snaps. When someone's rubbing Michael the wrong way, all of a sudden this mask gets put out, and it puts over his face, and then that's when he goes a little on the freaky side. Ultimately, though, the mask will just start kind of essentially coming apart over the course of the movie. This is more so near the beginning, but over time, like the one side will just come off where it's kind of like a half mask. Half of this you can see his human face underneath. Then after that, he just stops wearing the mask. One of the things too that Rob Zombie did as well was you saw Michael through a lot of the movie, which I think a lot of horror fans weren't that crazy about. That there was more of a mysteriousness to Michael if you had him, under a mask. But one of the things too that they did was when he wears the mask, you can see the beard that he has underneath. And Mezco, I think, did a pretty good job translating that into a figure as well. But if I let's just bring in once again the NECA version. If I bring in the NECA version and I bring Mezco's version, I think Mezco just did a better job on the mask. It's a little slender. It's not as big and round that NECA's ended up being. But like if you look at the less damaged side, I think it looks like a better mask than what ultimately NECA did with theirs. The coloring, although a little more on the dingier side, I think looks better than this kind of yellowish color that they ended up putting on this mask here. So it has its pros, it has its cons, but to be perfectly honest, I think Mezco has a better looking figure than what ultimately NECA did, although Mezco's just a little bit shorter. In the way of the articulation on Mezco's Halloween 2 Michael Myers, he does have the ball joint in the head, ball hinge joints in the shoulders. Now, unlike the NECA, you remember seeing that he only had the swivel point in the elbow, whereas Mezco's actually does bend at the elbow too, which is at least a step up. This also carried over when they did the Jason and the Freddy's as well. They all had that posability, which was so cool, and one of the first for an action figure of a horror character, because so relegated before they had just the swivel in the forearm. Mezco was one of the first to have the bend in the elbow, so I have to tip my hat to them when it comes to that. They have a swivel, or he has a swivel in his wrist, a swivel point in the waist, which unfortunately mine's gotten a little loose over time there, and no articulation, or none really to speak of when it comes to his feet. It does wiggle a little bit, but you can't really do much with it. It would have been interesting to see what Mezco would have done with this figure if they had done other releases where you had gotten the full beard treatment of Michael, an unmasked Michael, a half and half Michael mask. But ultimately they only went with the early rendition or early appearance of how he looked at the beginning of the movie. At the end of the day, I think it's a better figure than NECA's, to be perfectly honest. It still has that kind of stockiness to it that a lot of the the Cinema Fear figures seem to have. And again, if you don't believe me, if you have a look at like your NECA Friday 13th Jason and you compare it with Mezco's just has that chunkiness to it. But I think they trumped it with a better sculpt on the mask. I'm glad it's still a more traditional mask and it's not the half mask. So at the end of the day, it's still a pretty solid Michael Myers. I just really, again, love that sculpt on the face. I just wish he wasn't as stocky. If he was more of an upright Michael, I think I would be much happier with this figure. Today's throwback, we were having a look at the Mezco Toyz Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie Halloween 2. We're looking today at Michael Myers. Stay tuned, guys. Spot's going to have more throwbacks heading your way. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.